Just because we're queer doesn't mean we've lived the exact same lives. We're queer and our flag is the rainbow for a reason, right?
Exactly.
What's your story? What's your sign? It's like we're twin flames in a different life.
My name is Jose Javier. You can just call me Jose. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him. And I identify as queer and also non-binary, kind of like on the agender spectrum.
I feel like there are so many new terms that are coming out these days. Like even when I was younger, it was like LGBT. Do you mind maybe expanding a little bit on what agender, and you wrote as well in your original form, genderqueer, what those two things mean to you?
The definitions that I kind of like have for those terms in my mind are kind of based on the idea that you don't necessarily have to let the term define you as much as you get to define the term. To me, my understanding of genderqueer is basically just kind of that you're diverging from the sort of like cisgendered sort of hegemony. I use the term agender because it means kind of like, an absence of gender. I never really like internalized the idea of myself as having any gender. I don't think of myself as Jose a man or Jose a woman or a Jose whatever. Gender doesn't necessarily play a role in how I define myself and how I like decide how I'm gonna act. So yeah, it's kind of just how I vibe.
Coming from anthropology, I've taken quite a bit in gender studies. I just wanted to make sure, because like you said, I think labels are really great and kind of being a coming home place for people, but they can also be interpreted very differently by different individuals. For our Queer in Alberta series, the first question is very simple. It's just, would you mind telling me a little bit about your experience of coming out here in Alberta?
Growing up, I was never really around people who would necessarily like overwhelm you with messages that like gay is bad. And like just because of the way that society is, like I kind of internalized the sense that, oh, maybe it's like not something that I should be running my mouth about as a little kid. I actually just fairly recently came out to my parents. I think it was 2020. I came out in 2020. I remember it very well because it was the day that I passed my driver's test. So I think I was already kind of like riding a high there. I just walked upstairs, went to my parents' room and said, hey guys, I have something to tell you. And yeah.
In your original intake form that you had sent me for this, you had written that I don't have very many heartbreaking stories. I had a very accepting family. And that was probably exactly why I wanted to interview, because I think it's so important to hear those positive responses to coming out, especially from parents and immigrant parents. Like, I've experienced that as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's always something that I like talk about whenever the topic of like intersectionality and like the immigrant experience and the queer experience kind of comes up.
Absolutely.
I understand on a level like these sort of struggles that a queer immigrant can go through. However, I also have to say that we're not a monolith because, my parents were Latin American, they grew up in like a certain culture with certain beliefs. That doesn't mean that they are incapable of growth. They used to still have some pretty conservative like opinions and stuff like that growing up. But as time went on and I kind of like talked to them about it, and they were just exposed to different ideas, like they have managed to do a lot of work in like undoing that sort of internalized homophobia. My parents, they're humans. Sometimes they slip up, it happens, but like I always know that they're never doing it with any intent to harm me. Like they've made it very clear through their actions and their words that they're trying their best and they're always going to try to meet me in the middle.
Gosh, your parents are winning. I'm sorry. Like I'm hearing this and I'm just like, that is so incredible. And like really the golden standard of what we can ask for. People are not perfect and they make mistakes, but as long as they keep trying and proving, like you say, with their actions and words to be better and be considerate, like that's love. That's really beautiful.
So just straight up, I don't have the moment that other people talk about where it's like, oh, it was at this very moment where I knew, oh, I am not straight. I don't know. It's like, I think back to even kindergarten. And I think like when you're a kid, like, you're still a kid, so you don't have like that experience of sexuality necessarily, but you do have like little kid crushes and like fascinations and that kind of stuff. So even back then I can see like signs where I was like, maybe even back then I was already accepting like the fact that I was gay a little. It wasn't really until like I started learning what sexuality was and like that you can be attracted to people on that level and that kind of stuff where I was like, okay, maybe there's more to this than I thought. There was a brief period where I was like still kind of confused about it because I didn't like understand I had this like fascination towards men that other guys didn't typically show. But I was more so thinking like, why don't I have that towards women? Am I just like a late bloomer or whatever?
Yeah.
But Yes, I grew up and I eventually learned what the term gay meant, and I learned what it meant to be like homosexual and all that kind of stuff. I like slowly started realizing, I think that's me. It wasn't something that blindsided me later on in life. So I would definitely say that it's been easier for me because as I've been growing up, that sort of identity has been able to evolve along with me rather than it kind of just hitting me like a truck out of nowhere when I think I have a sense of who I am as a person. But it did also kind of make it a little more awkward because, you know, Catholic middle school, high school, the boys be saying the boy jokes and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
So even then I was feeling kind of isolated from the majority of people.
Right.
And so there were some moments where I was kind of like, wouldn't it just be easier if I were like not this? Wouldn't it be easier if I were straight?
Yeah, it's familiar.
Like, yeah, it's everybody feels it in this world, right?
I'm just so struck listening to it because it's just such a different experience from my own. You were able to find the language and like even with your peers and stuff, you know, like finding other queer friends in school in your formative years. You had access in a way that I never did. I didn't even know that it was like a possibility for me to ever be anything other than straight or to be anything other than white, which very clearly did not work out because I'm not fully white. But that was like kind of like the path that was expected of me and laid out for me. So I did very much have a moment where I was like confronted in the face with the fact that I was clearly not straight when I was in high school. But it's funny to look back because when you talk about childhood and you just have innocent crushes and like what you like, I can look back now with the hindsight that I have and see very clearly that this child was a homosexual, you know? She just had no idea whatsoever. She was like, it's so normal to look at images of Taylor Swift on Google Images for like an hour on the family computer because that was still a thing. Everybody does that.
I feel that. I really do feel that.
Because I also grew up in a fairly religious home in a small town environment, like I didn't even know that like gay people were a thing until I got a little older. And then it was like, gay people are bad. That was the immediate association that was kind of bellying it underneath.
Yeah, nobody deserves that, man. Like,
thank you.
Yeah, it's just, it's just so screwed up that, you know, you'll grow up not knowing or not even having the language to begin to think about like who you are as a person. And before you even get a chance to realize that's who you are, you're being bombarded with messages about why you're a monster. Nobody deserves that. And I just kind of like, there are moments where I feel a little guilty about the fact that I've had it so much easier compared to other people. Being queer isn't supposed to be about struggling. Like being queer isn't supposed to be a tragic thing. So I also got to remind myself that I shouldn't be feeling bad about the fact that I am having the type of experience that I want everybody to have moving forward, you know?
Don't feel guilty about it. Like, I am so freaking happy that your experience has been so positive and as it should be, and it gives me hope to hear that for other queer people. There is this kind of narrative of struggle with queerness, right? And queerness, it's a beautiful experience. It's a part of everyday life, and it's something that we should be able to celebrate and not just struggle with.
You know, the show Schitt's Creek? I was watching one episode with my mom. It was like that episode, I think the character's name is like David. He kisses another dude.
Yeah.
And so I was like laying stomach down on the bed, facing the foot of the bed, facing the TV, and my mom was like resting on the backboard. So like we couldn't see each other, but I just like heard her make this like ew kind of noise. And I remember just being like, oh, well, I don't think that's a good sign. Because by then I already knew that I was, you know, a little queer. Seeing how she went from like that to like, in the past few years we've had conversations and like she will literally break down in tears saying like one of my biggest regrets is just that I wasn't able to provide you with a space where you could be fully yourself in this house, and I'm sorry for that, and just know that I always love you. And I'm like, Mom, you can't be like doing this. I can't be feeling feelings all the time.
I'm even feeling the feelings on the other side of the screen. Like, it's kind of a joke now with these interviews. Inevitably, at some point, Kelsey cries. But I didn't expect in the first like 10 minutes to already feel the waterworks. That's so wonderful of your mom. I'm just so curious personally. My mother is Filipina, and so it's been a very difficult thing for her. Did you find maybe it was just like your parents specifically were just ready to go on this journey with you? Like, what did you do? I guess I'm asking because I still struggle with it a bit.
Like growing up, they and I would get into like these conversations about all this sort of topics, you know, everything from like abortion to gay rights to like gay people adopting. And they said that over time, as I kept like growing and sharing my viewpoints with them, they started listening and changing their viewpoints. And they said that through that sort of process, through our talks, by the time that I came out to them, they were like fully ready to just accept me no matter what.
It just seems like your parents are very open people, and considering that, you know, their views are not the only way to understand being in the world.
They had an opportunity to just kind of be like I am the parent, so I'm automatically right and you can't talk out. They're very good at being open and talking. It has made this entire process easier, and I think that really is like at the core of why my sort of experience has been different from a lot of people's, because you can't necessarily like make any progress if both parties aren't willing to move forward, you know? My dad, he was a missionary back in Mexico for a while. He's always been very religious, came from a religious household. But now he's at a point where he can like openly question like some of the things about the church, and like he has his own opinions, and he's like still very much, you know, he has like the faith in God and everything, but he doesn't just like blindly follow these sort of like authorities. So I do think that they're just like very good at kind of not just blindly following authority.
If your parents ever watch this, I just have to give them 5 stars. Every queer child deserves that kind of response. If you're coming out, there's some people in your life that you're afraid to lose. Parents and close friends. When you're younger, those are the people that are the most scary, right? So do you find that since you had such this like, maybe it wasn't perfect, but sounds like overall positive experience, has that affected like how you move forward in your confidence as a queer person?
Yeah, I definitely think that has definitely helped. It was definitely scary coming out to my parents. It was also always something that I was like really dreading. Because, you know, they're my only family here in this country. The rest of my family, they're all in Mexico. I have like some in Spain and some in Texas, but like, you know, they're all far away, right? But early on, I kind of understood that even if I came out to them, they would never like, you know, lose their love for me. But it was always a fear that the love they had for me would change. Being an immigrant, you get super close to the people that you have around with you.
Yes.
So it was like really scary to think like if I tell them and our relationship changes for the worse, am I going to be able to survive that? Having that fear kind of like shattered in front of me by their reactions, it's just, I think it like I'm in a much better place than I would be if they had had a worse reaction.
Much of my extended Filipino family was able to immigrate to Canada. So I grew up like surrounded by my titas, my titos, my ninangs. But I have another friend who is also half Filipino and half Canadian. And he is very much like you in the experience of all of his extended family is still in the Philippines. That layer of culture and immigrant experience where it's like you're afraid to come out because you don't want to lose that connection to your identity. That's so scary.
I went through this sort of like period where I was like all angsting over that idea of the fact that I have like a relatively weak connection to like my culture, as in my Spanish isn't as good as it used to be. And really like I go over there and I'm a fish out of the water with the slang and all that kind of stuff. So I did have a period where I was like, holy wow, am I like Mexican enough? Have I been like whitewashed? What's going on here? In that regards, and my self-confidence and like the whole being queer thing, they're kind of like correlated, because, you know, as I was able to like self-reflect and grow and develop my confidence as a queer person, I was also able to grow in my confidence as a Mexican Canadian person. I can't be Mexican or queer. I'm like a queer Mexican.
We cannot separate these identities. They are intrinsic to who we are. Really, I've been so privileged to chat with many like fellow POCs through this project. And it's something that a lot of us are echoing in the same sentiment. If I go back to the Philippines, of course, I'm going to feel exceptionally white. To be Filipina in the Philippines is very different than to be Filipina in Canada. And then adding in like that extra layer for me of being mixed, it's like all of these different forms of identity.
Yeah, really. It's just like the mixed and the diaspora experience are like so similar for so many reasons. Just because we're queer doesn't mean we've lived the exact same lives. We're queer and our flag is the rainbow for a reason, right?
Exactly. And also I think just so important to break that hegemonic idea of only seeing representation of queerness via whiteness. That's why I've been so happy to be lucky enough to interview the people that I have, to really show that there are more stories out there than just like white gay people.
No, honestly, because the world is still struggling to catch up with the idea of just queerness being visible, that the only way they can palette it is through like, you know, suburban middle class whiteness. All queer people have like a level of struggle that they go through, but I definitely think when you like add intersectionality to it, it definitely like kind of ramps up the difficulty level in the game that you have to play. There's this entire narrative that Alberta is kind of like the Florida of Canada, you know? And like, you know, that's definitely like, I understand that on some level.
Yeah.
But also it kind of has like the same energy as when certain queer people are like, oh, I can't go to this country because I'm illegal there. You're almost erasing the fact that there are queer people in that Canadian Florida or that country where it's illegal to be gay. You're incidentally erasing the queer people who are like living there and are like dealing with that.
Yes, and I'm so glad you said that. I don't think anyone else has kind of brought that up, and it's been something that I've really thought myself. This idea that Alberta is just full of homophobic, racist people. Like, yeah, there are definitely people like that here, but I don't know, like when people act like that or only portray Alberta in that lens, it 100% erases people like you and me that are also here.
Yeah, you know, we're in the trenches, man. So like, I don't know, a little recognition would be nice.
Yeah, a little solidarity would be cool. There was somebody I knew who like is queer and they visited Alberta with like their girlfriend on a vacation, and they posted on Instagram like, we're here to like queer it up and, you know, stand up against the hicks and the homophobes. And I'm like, you do know we're also here too though, right? Like, I'm kind of pissed that you said this.
Hick and homophobe reporting for duty, I guess.
Yeah, clearly I yassified the role, but my goodness. If you could, you know, give some advice to some other queer Albertans who may be struggling with their identity in ways that you found you did, what would it be?
This is like the stereotypical advice that everybody will give you, but like, you got to talk to people about it. I get it. It's really freaking hard to talk to people, especially when it's like about stuff like queerness, you know, where there's this entire like stigma around it, where the world just kind of tells you to keep it in.
Yeah.
It does take a lot of effort, and it sometimes doesn't feel like it's worth even like bringing up because it's like so much emotional labor for what doesn't feel like any return. But like, you gotta get it out. If you don't get it out, it's gonna rot you from the inside out, and you're gonna be worse off than if you didn't talk about it.
You can try and keep it inside and live within parameters that don't have room for you, and it will just eat you alive. Think for like younger queer people who are maybe like still living at home or in high school or junior high. At that point, if you don't have a driver's license, if you don't have like access to transportation to travel around, like your hometown is very much your whole world, and that can feel like that's all there is in the world. But that's another huge thing that if I could go back in time and talk to younger Kelsey, I'd be like, hey, Bonnieville's not it for you. There's so much out there and so much room to be super freaking gay.
Yeah, it's just when you're like younger and you don't have all the freedoms that you need to be able to branch out, it really does feel like it's the end of the world if you can't find anybody in your immediate vicinity, or like you can't find acceptance in your immediate vicinity. But like, sometimes it's just a matter of sticking through it. Even if you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, doesn't mean it's not there. There's so much more to the world than just, you know, being trapped in a small place with small-minded people.
You're in St. Albert, so it's not like a huge metropolis, but you seem so confident and comfortable in your queer identity. So I wanted to ask you, do you find that like attitudes or the town that you're in itself is quite accepting?
I tend to surround myself very much in specifically the queer sort of community in my spaces, so I'm a little biased in saying yes, but I will say that there is still very much like some pushback. As crazy as it seems, there are small-minded people in the year of our Lord 2022. They exist everywhere, right? I want to have confidence in the fact that times are changing and people are getting more accepting. Like, I'm putting all my eggs in that basket, but you do still have to be prepared for some backlash and like a little bit of like tomfoolery from the people. I'm still dying over that year of our Lord 2022. That's so funny. Yeah, that totally just distracted me and sidelined. Well done. If you could go back in time and talk to your younger self and tell them something as the person that you are today, what would it be? Not to hold certain things against certain people. Maybe specifically with my parents, like, you know, if there were moments of growing pains, definitely. Yeah. There were moments where I let things that they said to me get to me a lot more than like, in retrospect, maybe I should have. Parents are people at the end of the day. They come with their own baggage, their own stories, and that colors the way that they interact and think about the world. So they can't always be the 100% perfect person that you need in your life, and they can't always tell you what you need to hear in your moment. But as long as you genuinely still understand that they are trying, and only if they are willing to show that they are still genuinely trying, then you've got to give them a little bit of like, you know, benefit of the doubt. There are certain parents who are like not necessarily good people, and there are like, you know, just because you're a parent doesn't mean you're a good parent. But if your parent has like shown time and time again that they're trying, then like, you know, I would tell myself, don't hold it against them as much as you are. It'll pass, they'll learn. They're just trying to make sense of all this just as much as you are. Nobody gives you a guidebook on being queer, just like nobody gives you a guidebook on being the parent of a queer person, you know? The queer experience isn't going to look like the straight experience. Like,
No.
your own experience is never going to look like somebody else's experience. I think on some level, it just requires you to accept that, like, yeah, you got to be your own person, and you got to take all these benefits that your parents have given you, and you got to do something with them.
Oh, thank you so much for being so vulnerable and open in the space with me. Like, it has been so good to connect. I've said over and over again, but I mean it sincerely.
I'm excited to like keep seeing what you do with this project.